right, well, welcome on to this Q&A. Again, welcome to this Q&A. Question came in. Whatever, earlier. The question was that why did God create the ability for people to be immoral? This person said, I got a young cousin, dresses and acts like, we'll keep this clean, like somebody who shouldn't. Right, and nothing we can do about it. She doesn't listen. Why do I have to suffer from this? And the other aspect of it was, well, I'm unfortunately kind of upset at God. Okay, so that comes to the question. That why did God create evil? Right, that is essentially the question. Why did God create evil? And, for the Christians, not such a question because they misinterpret the verse, right? The verse of Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7, again, which says that God created evil. So if you're a Christian, what are you going to do? You got to mistranslate it. So what do they hold? They hold, it was sadness, it was other things, whatever, Webster's 8th definition, what it means. But God created evil. Okay. Now, if God created evil, and he created an evil inclination. Now, Adam and Eve ate from the tree. Evil inclination now is going to go inside of a person, so therefore, it's going to be much harder to fight against. Meaning that if a person does the right thing, very good. So they are going to sanctify the body, right? Sanctify the soul. Very good. Make the soul stronger. Okay. If you go against that, you give in to your evil inclination, you debase the body, you debase the soul. Right? So therefore, that's bad. Right? So you have the greatest amount of spirituality you can reach. You have the greatest amount of desire that can bring you down. Right? See, by Jews, it's either way. Either you go, way up or you go way down. Really nothing. Right, nothing in between. There's no being, neutral, kind of like Switzerland, so to speak. Nonetheless, why did God create evil? Now, one misinterpretation is that if we believe God is good and He's all good, then if there's evil, it must be God's evil. No, obviously God's not evil. The Torah says, or the prophet says, that God created evil. Now, what's the purpose of evil? Purpose of evil is to give people free choice. The evil inclination is to give people free choice. The whole point that we're created, we're born in this world, is the Ramchal says in Derech Hashem, he says the way of God, he says also in Path of the Just, we are in this world to toil, right? That's what we're here for. We're in this world to struggle. Nobody gets, no free lunch, so to speak. You want to have a portion of the world to come, you got to be in this world, right? You got to go through the trials and tribulations of this world, whatever they may be. Now, that being said, doesn't everyone has free choice, right? Animals do not have free choice. They're programmed DNA, as we always say. They can choose to eat, not to eat, whatever, but it's not free choice, right? They only have one aspect of the soul, the animalistic side of the soul. Everyone has that as well, Jews or non-Jews. But animals, plants, the stars, the moon, right? Anything inanimate does not have free choice. They absolutely have no free choice. Now, if they have no free choice, so there's only one being that has free choice, that's us. Right? God created us, He breathed in the spirit of life, gave us the ability to make decisions, right? As the Aramaic translation says, gave us the ability to speak, to make decisions. So we can make good decisions, we can make bad decisions, right? Everything else does not make any decisions. They are acted upon. Right? They don't have free choice either way. Now, that being said, a female, let's say, you can go for a male also. I mean, no difference. We won't discriminate here. That a person can dress any way they want. They have free choice. Now, obviously, Jews have laws guarding modesty, right? Certainly for women, certainly guys also. So, again, could a Jewish person just throw off the yoke and do whatever they want, dress the way they want? They could. right? Is that what God wants? No, certainly not. There are obligations and modesty. Okay. Now, a non-Jew, they have obligations and modesty? No. Seemingly they have no obligations. Now, I would say it's not one of the Noahide laws, right? But I would say it's a moral imperative. I mean, there is, people should have some, base core values. That's what the Noahide laws are. They are universal laws, right? They're universal laws. Even though there are 7 universal laws, it's probably an umbrella, probably about 50 or 60, let's say all together. But again, if a woman or a guy, it's 100 degrees out, 35 degrees Celsius, yeah, you walk outside, it's very hot. Okay. You know what they say in the winter, when it's cold, you can always add layers. In the summer, only so many layers you can take off. Now, isn't a person going to feel more comfortable in, shorts and a tank top or whatever, t-shirt? Sure. Yeah. But if it's 35 degrees Celsius or 100 degrees, you're going to sweat either way. So you can say, but I don't have to sweat that much. If I'm wearing, a shirt and pants or whatever, it's going to be warm. Especially if you wear, let's say, if you're a guy, you wear a jacket and a hat, it's warm, right? Right? That's true. Right? 100%. Doesn't change anything. Right? The fact that a person, could wear less clothing, okay. Isn't it still hot? Right? If it's, 100 degrees or 35 degrees Celsius, it's still pretty hot. Doesn't change anything. So there's a question, someone will say, there's a question of being hot and being really hot. Okay. But again, the modesty laws really don't change over here. Now, for a non-Jew, male or female, doesn't really matter, right? Isn't there a base obligation really to cover yourself up? There should be a base obligation, right? At the very least, right? We're not animals. We're not, walking around with nothing. I mean, but you see what people wear. Say, okay, there should be base values. Certain base values. Okay. Now, is that going to come under the Noahide laws? Right. So again, I would probably say that as a moral imperative, there would be an obligation, right? There would be an obligation, to dress modestly, for a non-Jew. For a Jew, there's an obligation. There's nothing to talk about, right? But the question over here is, okay, maybe it doesn't come under the Noahide laws. Maybe, as Kaufman would say, it's only a moral imperative. Okay. Now, could it be, right? We'll throw this out there, right? Could it be, women may be objectified by the way they dress? I'm not saying it's right, right? But could that happen? Sure. By Jews or non-Jews, doesn't matter, right? Could that happen? Yes. Are they? Yes. Is it right? No. Yeah, but they dress a certain way. Now you can say it's not their fault. And if some guy looks, right, and that putting a stumbling block in front of them, so that doesn't apply to non-Jews in general, right? It applies to Jews. But isn't it the fault of the guy that he looks? Yes. Yeah. He shouldn't look. Very good. A woman's dressed in a provocative way. She can say it's the way I dress. You want to look, it's your fault. But they dress in a provocative way for a reason. Not just that's the way they feel I dress it. But I'm not saying by everybody, by some people. Okay. Now, even if you're going to tell me that, is that a good thing? Is that a good thing for a woman in general? Again, a guy walking out in shorts, you're going to say, oh, but, he's also got issues, right? You're also got to dress in a modest way, right? So you can pray that way, other obligations, cover yourself up, but okay. Even in such a case, don't we all have choices? Don't we all make choices? We can make good choices. We can make bad choices, right? We certainly can do that. No one's putting a gun to anyone's head. No one's saying, well, if you don't do this or you do this, you're going to fry in hell forever. Or, someone's forcing you, right? Someone's forcing you, etc. No one's forcing anyone, right? No one's forcing anyone to do anything. Okay. Again, even if that's true, where no one's forcing a person makes a choice. So if they choose to do that, that's their choice. So the question was, why did God create it? Right? Why did God create this? It's not just the urge, just not the urge for immorality. That's that's part of it. But what's the urge in general? It's Morenu v'Rabbeinu, the yetzer hara. It's called the evil inclination. Yeah, it's called the evil inclination. People do all kinds of things based on desire. Not that it's a good thing, right? Some things yes, some things no, but in general, going according to your base desires, what differentiates between you and an animal, right? So I mentioned this, a number of weeks ago in my BJQ radio podcast, and brought down the name of Rabbi, right? Someone says, I can do what I want. It doesn't matter, male, female, Jew, non-Jew, doesn't matter. They say, I can do what I want, right? I can do what I want. Very good, right? So it says Rev Elio Lopian, in Torah Giants, the last generation, one of the big Musar giants of the last generation. And he asked the following question, a great question. I mean, he doesn't need me to agree, but it's a great question. And the question is, person's going to say, they have a right to do what they want. They can go where they want, do what they want. Very good. So says Rev Elio Lopian, what differentiates between you and an animal? Animals also do what they want. Animals also go wherever they want. Right? They're not limited. So they're also not limited. Very good. Right? So what differentiates between you and an animal? Great question. Right? I'm dying to use it. I haven't been able to use it, but one day I'll be able to use it. Yeah? So what's the difference? Animals also do what they want. Yeah? So what makes you any different than an animal? Right? Says Rabbi, what makes a human being different than an animal? Because we have the ability to go against our desire. We have the ability to know, or let's say better, we have the ability to go against our desire. Animals can't do that. Animals don't have that choice. Good, they can choose to eat, not to eat. Okay, that's instinct. It's part of instinct. It's part of their DNA. It's not who they are, right? It's not, it's like, it's not free choice per se. We're the only species in the world, in the universe, that have the ability to make that decision. But it's a great question, though. It's a great question. Yeah? Stop someone dead in their tracks. They'll say, oh, what do you think? I'm an animal? So what differentiates a person between them and an animal? And the only thing that differentiates, he says, is we have the ability to make, to go against our desires, right? To make choices, to go against them. Animals can't do that, right? Certainly not. So a person will say, I'll dress the way I want. Okay. I'm not big into externals necessarily. You got people that, let's say, don't dress the part, so to speak. They may be more religious than people, the people that do. They may be more religious than other people that dress the part. Very good. Yeah, but there's a least common denominator. And a good example is certainly in the summer. Now, most people don't have a clue when it comes to modesty. They'll say, I'll dress the way I want to dress. I want to wear shorts, I'll wear shorts. I want to wear really short shorts. Okay. I wear a tank top, I'll wear this, okay. People make choices. They make choices. Right? Now, so if a guy looks, it's his fault. You're going to say, but isn't that putting stumbling block? It could be. Doesn't apply to non-Jews, but let's say, right, it could be. But it's not their fault. Really, it's not their fault. If it's a Jew, it would be their fault. But non-Jew is not necessarily their fault. Okay. But the question is, that we always have to ask, is what I do, does it make me closer to God or not? That's the question, right? What I see, what I read, how I act, Now, sometimes we act in a certain way. We just react. We don't think about what we do. We just get caught up in the moment, right? We end up reacting. But in general, we all make decisions, right? We all make decisions. Could be good decisions, could be bad decisions. Now, in this case, I would say a person, they can decide to do whatever they want. They can wear whatever they want, right? But we believe, the body is holy, should be covered up, right? Shouldn't show as as much in public. We're not saying you have to wear a burqa. We're not going that far, right? The whole point of modesty, so people won't look. But if you wear, there are women, we call them the shawl ladies. They wear like a shawl over, over their other clothing. But again, that draws other attention. That draws more attention because it's not normal, right? That's totally not normal because they're doing it for extra modesty. But the whole point of modesty, in general, right, is that someone's not going to look, right? They dress a certain way, okay. In this case, if they dress with a shawl, or there are some women who almost like wear a burqa, yeah, very similar to a burqa. We only see the face, but barely see anything else. Okay, again, the vast majority of rabbinic authorities came out against it. Because they're adding on to modesty, but it does the opposite effect. Right? The opposite effect is people are going to look. Why? Because it's strange. Why would an Orthodox Jewish woman wear a burqa? Why in the world would she wear a burqa in general? What I'm talking about in the summer, and then even in the winter. It's going to draw extra attention. That's not what modesty is. Totally not what modesty is. They wear a shawl, no different. Right? No different. So there are different ways to grab attention, right? The easiest way to grab attention is the way you dress. Now, again, a person can say, doesn't matter, I'm not thinking that. I'm more comfortable dressing this way. Okay. Yeah. Now, let's say that's true for some people. Okay. Now, there are other people that will dress in a certain way because they want people to look. Yeah, I think that's kind of obvious, right? There's a guy talking, right? So, okay. Is everybody doing that? I'm not saying everybody's doing that, right? I would think probably a nice percentage probably is. Because they want, got a nice body, they want to show off their body. Very good. Comes at a price. If it sure comes at a price. There are reasons why women get objectified. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not coming to back it here. Right? I'm just pointing out if you dress a certain way, like what do you expect? But it's not their fault. Men should be in control of their thoughts. They should be. I'm not denying that. 100%, they should be in control of their thoughts. On the other hand, it cheapens themselves. That's what it does. Right? The body's holy, should be used in the right way. This, again, goes against Christians because they're going to say everything's bad and everything's evil and whatever. So God gave you the greatest sex, greatest drive. Right? So it's going to be used in the right way. Very good. Going to be used in the right way. If not, right? If not, it's going to be a problem. Right? 100% should be a problem. Someone asks, shorts that go down to the knee considered modest? They should have to go. They should go past the knee. Problem. The rule of thumb is, if a woman wears a skirt, let's say, if a woman wears a skirt and if she sits down, you can see her knee. Yeah, that's a problem, right? So obviously, if it's long enough, I'm not saying it has to go all the way to the floor, but if it's long enough, that won't happen. So if you tell me you got, you got shorts that would do that, go further down, okay. There's a different issue though. There's a different issue. The issue is that if you had shorts that were baggy shorts, in other words, you can't see the split between the legs, right? If that would be the case, they would go further down, okay. So that probably wouldn't be a problem. But if it shows the split, right, like pants between, it shows a split between the legs, right, that would be forbidden. Now, there are other things, technically speaking, if a woman wears something, let's say it goes right to the knee. So if she sits down, it's going to come up. That's a problem, right? But there are other issues. What are the other issues? Person wears something, it's tight. Yeah, it's tight. Right? I don't need further explanation. It's tight. Yeah, so that's going to be a problem, right? It should be free flowing, should not be tight in any way, shape, or form because it's going to show up part of the body, right? If it's free flowing, meaning it's longer, that shouldn't be an issue, right? But again, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem if it shows a split between the legs. That's why even pants that are considered, let's say, these are pants for women, right? Right? People will make the claim there are pants for women. Yeah, totally for women. What's the difference? What's the difference? What would be the difference over here? If it shows a split in between, then it's going to be a problem. You're going to tell me, but it's not wearing men's clothing, right? It's made for women. That's what it says, made for women. Okay. But they're pants. So it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what, you want to tell me it's specifically made for that. Bottom line is they are, what do you call it? They are, you see the split. See the split, between the legs. So that would be forbidden. That would be forbidden. But again, a person technically can be considered modest. I'll say, wear a skirt, this, that, okay. Well, heard a number of people say that, wearing things should never be tight, right? It's not, I don't think this is rocket science either. You want to wear a skirt, very good, right? Should be long enough and it shouldn't be tight. If it's too tight, get a bigger size. But it looks bad. Okay. It looks bad, right? Figure out something that looks good, right? But if it's tight, it's going to be a problem. If you're going to hold by the law, the laws of modesty, or in general, if you're going to hold by any laws, right? Kaufman's law is you do it right. If someone says, listen, I'm new to all this, I'm growing into this, that, okay, that's a different issue. But if someone's looking to circumvent and say, okay, it's a skirt, it's a skirt. Yeah, what about, let's say you have a long enough skirt. Woman has a long enough skirt, and there's a slit in the back. Yeah, slit in the back is always going to be a problem, right? It's going to be sewn. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times, I've seen, not that I'm looking per se, but okay, they have a skirt, very good. Long enough skirt, very good. And there's a slit right down the back. So what does that help? It doesn't help, right? That has to be sewed up. And again, I understand, for some people, it's a big issue. It's a very big issue. Right? And people get caught up, I will tell you. People get caught up in lengths. In other words, how far over the knee does it have to be? Quarter of an inch, 2 inches, 2.5 inches, more or less. Yeah. So people get caught up in the numbers without understanding what's behind it. Someone asks, women can't wear shorts or pants. Again, shorts are going to be a problem because of the split between the legs. If it would be something where they're baggy, totally baggy, but it's more like a skirt than shorts, and it goes halfway down the leg, let's say past the knee, that shouldn't be a problem, right? But if it's going to be, shorts in general, which probably won't go to the knee, right? But even if they would, the problem's going to be, once the person sits down, it's going to be exposed. And even without that, you got a problem because it's going to be a split between the legs. So that'll knock out shorts and pants for women, even if the pants themselves are considered, only made for women, right? That's the laws of modesty are not going to make one bit of difference because pants, whether they're made for women, or not, really, we're not going to say, maybe even if they're made for women, maybe we'll say that there's a total prohibition because we're wearing men's clothing. Doesn't matter if it's made for women, they're pants, right? Essentially, they're pants. Now, Even if someone's going to say, but they're specifically made for women. Okay. So you get out of that problem. Let's say, I don't believe it, but let's say you get out of that problem. Very good. What's the other issue? What's the other issue? The other issue is you see the split between the legs. That's the issue. That issue doesn't change. That issue you don't get around. Right? So, in either case, the person's going to get stuck. Now the problem is, everyone's going to jump up and down and say, what do you mean? In the summer it's hot. You're right. The summer is hot. Now, there are some women, probably more, I would say they're probably more modern, that, when it's very hot, they will not wear stockings or thigh highs. Because, hey, it's too hot. Maybe they won't wear socks at all. Or maybe they'll wear mini socks or whatever. Okay. Yeah. So, in the modern Orthodox community, you'll see women that, let's say don't wear stockings or thigh highs during the summer. You're going to say it's oppressive. The heat's oppressive. It's very hot. Very good. Yeah. Problem is, there are many rabbinic authorities that hold that the Torah prohibition, even if a woman's wearing a skirt, there's a Torah prohibition that from the knee down has to be covered. Meaning that covering with the skirt is good, 100% is good, but underneath has to be covered. Also underneath has to be covered, maybe a Torah prohibition. Now, some will say, okay, it's difference of opinion. Depends who you hold like this. Okay. But I'm telling you, in the modern Orthodox community, you will see women that do not cover their legs. I'm not saying they don't wear skirts. They don't cover their legs. Right? Not with socks, not with anything in the summer. It's hot. Okay. Yeah, in the outdoor Orthodox community, you won't see that. You will not see that. They cover their legs, either with stockings or thigh highs. Right? Either way, you tell me, but it's another layer and it's oppressively hot. Okay. I'm telling you, there's a big difference in the communities. Yeah. I'm talking about, even within Chabad and Hasidic communities, you will not see women that do not cover their legs in the summer. Right? Or the winter. Doesn't matter. But I'm telling you, even if it's oppressively hot, they will still, be covered. So you can tell me, but it's hot. Okay. It depends who you want to identify with over here. But in general, there are many rabbinic authorities that hold from the knee down to Torah prohibitions are not covered. So they can answer, okay, we don't hold like those rabbis. We're more lenient. Okay. Yeah, you want to be more lenient, But it's not so simple. You're talking about a potential Torah prohibition. Over here, someone said they heard 4 to 6 inches below the knee. Yeah, it depends. Okay. Right? But at the end of the day, what's the guideline? The guideline is if a woman's sitting down and her skirt comes up, we'll keep this clean. If her skirt comes up, you can see the knee, then it means it's not long enough. Again, I'm not saying that's there's some people like to wear skirts that go all the way down to the floor. It's a different issue. That might be a different problem. I can tell me legs are covered, this and that's a good thing. But in the secular world, there are women that wear skirts all the way down. So it might be an issue. Could be an issue. Right? But again, 4 to 6 inches is probably good. But again, what's the problem though? The problem is people get caught up in this whole thing. They say 4 inches, 6 inches, whatever, but they don't see what's behind it. And they don't understand what's behind it. They only look at numbers. And kids in school say, no, your dress is too short, go back, whatever, it's not 6 inches, take a ruler. Okay. There isn't what to be said for that, but if they miss the whole point of why they're doing it, and it's all about numbers and lengths and this and that, but they miss, the spiritual side behind it, they're not going to enjoy it. Yeah, even if the school says these are school rules, this is what you have to do. This is what the uniform is, right? So, either you're going to conform or you won't go there, right? And find another place where, maybe they dress a little bit different, maybe they're more, more modern, but that comes with a whole nother set of problems, right? Because normally the first thing when someone struggles in Judaism in general, male or female, the first thing that normally goes, besides the guy's yarmulke, his kippah, is going to be the dress code and how they're going to dress. That's the first thing that's going to change. I'm not talking about necessarily desecrating Shabbos, other things. That is the first major blow. That's where you see the biggest problem. right? Sorry, that's where you see there is a problem. Once, you know, once the dress code changes, yeah, and then they're like, they're holding on to a thread, and the reason is because you're not going to really fit in anywhere, you know, and they're struggling, right? It's very clear they're struggling. That's the first case. That's the first line of defense, right? Is going to be how they dress. For a guy, what's that going to mean? You walk around in t-shirts, walk around, in jeans, right? Let's say, which, certainly in the outdoor Orthodox community, you won't see guys in jeans unless they're like working around the house or doing other things. And even then, they probably wouldn't wear jeans anyway. It's just again what it represents. So, one that changes. That's the first sign. One of the first signs that there's an issue. And again, modesty goes both ways. It's not just for women, right? Certainly for guys also. But it's not an easy thing if it's not explained in the right way. And if it's just about rules and lengths and rulers and different things, they miss the whole point. They miss the whole point. It's not just, well, this is forbidden, that's forbidden, whatever, but you got to see the beauty, right? You can't just say, well, everything's forbidden, all these things, are forbidden. You got to understand why. And a person's not questioning to be a heretic, right? Schools over the years have been learning this, and implemented, times for people to be able to ask these questions. They have questions. They have legitimate questions. Now, some may be asking just to ask, okay, right? That might be a problem, right? In general, but if they get blown off so many times, what's going to happen is they're going to say, see, Judaism doesn't have any answers. So then what's the point of keeping it if there are no answers, right? So, if you don't have an answer, say, it's a good question, I'm going to get some guidance on this. I'll get back to you. We'll discuss it. Maybe we'll discuss it as a class, whatever it is. But they have to know there's an answer. I mean, sometimes the answer is God said it, okay, but it has to be explained. And if you don't explain it and they think there are no answers, they're going to look elsewhere. They're going to do other things. Now, again, some people may do it just, to ask the question, and to, like to start up and this and that. You have people like that, that like are hanging on by a thread, if that. At the same time, they deserve an answer. Now, the question is going to be, we've spoken about this also, question is going to be, what type of question are they asking? Are they asking a question they don't care about the answer? Just like the evil son, in the Haggadah, right? You blunt his teeth, you don't give him an answer. The question obviously is, why don't you give him an answer? Why don't you draw him close? Why do you blunt his teeth? Why do you just say, had you been in Egypt, you never would have come out? Because he's not asking a question. He's asking a similar thing. He's really asking a similar thing to the wise son. Very good. The wise son, you give an answer because he wants an answer and he deserves an answer. Here, by the rhetoric, how he's asking the question, you see he's not asking a question. He's got an agenda. So when someone, asks an answer, you can't answer an answer, right? Chaim Brisker, famous story. Chaim Brisker more than 200 years ago, from Torah Giants Generation, according to everybody. And he had students. He was the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin, with the Netziv, Rabbi Tzvi Berliner. And they had a student that went off. So he asked the student years later, like, what happened to you? He said, I had questions. I had a lot of questions. So Rav Chaim asked him, did you have questions when you're in yeshiva? Or did you have questions afterwards? So he said, I had questions afterwards. So Rav Chaim Brisker answered him. He said, I can't help you then. He said, I can't help you because I can't answer an answer. Right? In other words, they have an agenda. They say, I think this and I think that, right? People get caught up and say, I have to answer this question. They didn't ask a question. They just made a statement. Statements we don't answer. Statements are agendas. If you want to answer it, you could, but they didn't ask the question. Someone says, I think Judaism discriminates against women. What's the answer? Oh. They didn't ask a question. You say, oh. And I really think it is okay. So you say, oh. Finally, after a while, they're going to say, why do you keep saying oh? Because you made statements. You didn't ask a question. There's no question being asked. He said, if I were to ask you what you think that Judaism says about women is bad, what would you answer? Okay, that's a question. Right? But when someone comes out with a statement and they say, oh, there's no real truth and there's no real this and it's all make believe and you're all being brainwashed. What's the answer? Oh. Because people are going to get caught up in it and say, oh, no, I'm going to answer this. I'm going to show he's a heretic. They didn't ask any questions. They didn't ask any questions. One of my biggest things is that, I can keep my big mouth shut. So, I'm in certain circumstances. People say things. I'll answer where I have to. But in general, if there are no questions coming out, it's not really that bad or whatever, I'm not going to answer it. Because it's an agenda. You can't answer an answer. You can try. You're not going to get anywhere. Right? Just like Rav Chaim said, I can't answer an answer. If you have a question, it's one thing. If you have an agenda, something else. Right? Something else. So, you have to see where the question is coming from. Some people ask questions because they ask questions. Okay. Imagine like someone says, where's God during the Holocaust? Yeah. So you say, well, God was where he always is. Like, what's the question? It's like, no, why did God kill 6 million Jews? Well, it takes a lot of people kill 6 million Jews. You had the Russians, you had the Poles, you had the Ukrainians, you had the Latvians, you had the Germans, you had the Hungarians, you had a lot of people. Yeah, it's like, well, it's just a question I ask. It's it makes rabbis fidget. I say, oh, I got a great book. It's called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. You want to read it? No. Okay. I guess you weren't that interested, right? People throw out questions sometimes, just to throw out questions. Yeah, but if they have a good question, you don't know the answer, don't give a bad answer. Say, good question. I'll get back to you. I'm not the world's greatest, Torah expert. I'll get back to you, right? You deserve an answer. It's a good question. They have to see they asked a good question. They have to see there's an answer, right? At some point, you get an answer. Okay. But you have to see where the question's coming from. And if someone's just attacking and this and that, like someone once told me, and I got stuck. I told the story a few years ago. I got stuck in my bathroom. One of the what do you call it? The lock jammed. Right. So whatever. It took 45 minutes. 45 minutes with someone helping, trying to get this door open. Whatever. And so I was telling someone, tongue in cheek. I said, yeah. I said I couldn't even pray. Couldn't even pray to help to help me. So the person said, oh, is that against one of the rules? Right? Oh, you can't pray in the bathroom. Is that against one of the rules? My answer was, yeah, it's against one of the rules. That was it. They weren't interested in an answer. They just like wanted to make fun. Oh, is that one of the rules? Yeah. Next. Probably didn't go further than that. Okay. But you have to see where it's coming from. And if they're not going to listen and it's antagonistic, I don't have to answer. There's no point to answer because they have an agenda, right? That's why we don't answer, normally agendas. You can try, but most people probably not going to be convinced. They want, try and answer a Christian, they come back with the same things. Same stupid mistranslations. They're not, they're going to say, oh, Rashi missed the boat. This one missed the boat. It's very clear. It's talking about JC. Like, come on. Like, really? And this means this, and this means that, and you don't know what you're talking about. Okay. You're going to argue with them? A waste of time. A waste of time. Right, in general. And most people are most likely aware of that. Someone asks, very good, aren't chains prohibited by the Torah? I don't think prohibited by the Torah. I would say, it covers the legs. For a guy, could he wear them? In theory. But again, it's, I would say a person feels very different when they wear jeans and they wear a suit. You wear jeans, it's like, or shorts in general. Yeah, well, let's say jeans. We'll make it easy. Yeah, a person wearing jeans, you'll say, "Oh, I feel more comfortable." This and that. What does the person think? What does the person think? Maybe he's working around the house. He's doing other things. You're gonna say, "Well, I get dressed up when I pray." So what's the difference? What's the difference? You walk outside. You're doing other things. You're going somewhere, whatever. Right? See, also in God's presence. So why should you wear jeans? Yeah, again, in a modern Orthodox community, they wear jeans. And not everybody. I'm saying everybody, but people wear jeans. For sure. Isn't it prohibited? Other Orthodox community, you don't see it. You won't see it by Chabad. You won't see it in any Hasidic communities. You won't see it in any ultra Orthodox, um, communities. If someone's working around the house, they don't want to get, ruin a suit or whatever, suit pants or whatever. Could they change to something more comfortable? They could. Some people have work clothes. They don't care. They'll just, use those as work clothes. They won't get jeans. But yeah, isn't it a problem? Yes. In a modern Orthodox community, you'll see people wear them, right? 100%. If the leg must be covered, then what of the foot? Same thing. Foot should also be covered. Yeah. Open sandals are acceptable. So for women, no. And for men shouldn't. I was away for Shabbos and prayed in a much more modern place, let's say. So, here every day, the Kohanim, the priest bless the congregation. It's only done outside of Israel on the high holy days and any festival, right? On Shavuos, on Sukkot, and on Passover. So I said to someone, there were people. I mean, attire was atrocious. I can't even tell you. For some people, it was like absolutely atrocious. Some people came in shorts. I mean, okay, nice shorts. Okay, they're shorts. How could a guy come to synagogue in shorts? I mean, like it's just embarrassing. Totally embarrassing, right? Some people were better dressed, worse dressed. I'm not even talking about colored shirts and this and that. I mean, it was just a horrific thing to see. Whatever. But, I became religious in that type of community, so it's not, not shocking. But what was I shocked about? What was I shocked about? Someone went to do Birkas Kohanim, went to bless the Kohanim, bless the congregation. Guy's wearing shirt, so he's wearing sandals, no socks. Right, so he's blessing the congregation barefoot. Now again, technically, is that a problem? Even if you hold according to those rabbinic authorities, there are rabbinic authorities hold the guy can wear sandals. They have very, very comfortable sandals. I would love to wear them. I would love to wear them. But, obviously all the communities I've been in, except for one, you don't wear them. But they're extremely comfortable. Okay. But even according to those authorities that say you're allowed to wear sandals, you gotta wear socks. I'm not talking about where you're blessing the congregation if you're a Kohen. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about going anywhere. You want to pray with socks. That's what they hold. You pray with socks. Yeah. Now, how can some people pray not without socks? You go in front of a king. Think about it. You go in front of a king. Are you I mean, if you're Israeli, you probably would do this, right? If you go in front of a king, would you really wear flip-flops? Or let's say better, sandals. You probably won't wear flip-flops, right? Sandals. Would you go in front of a king in sandals without socks? Would you go in front of a king with sandals, even with socks? Yeah. You go in, here in any synagogue, doesn't matter where. You're in front of the King of Kings. You're in front of the King of Kings. How in the world could you go in front of the King of Kings in sandals? Even me, who'd love to wear sandals, yeah, would love to wear sandals, would never wear sandals in the synagogue, even with socks. Yeah, like there's a limit. There's a limit over here. So you gotta ask yourself. You gotta ask. So that you say that's different by prayer. Okay, yeah, maybe prayer is different. But again, why shouldn't a person have their feet covered? We're talking about you got an athlete's foot, other things. Not even talking about that. The feet should be covered, even if a woman, is not gonna cover her legs, right, with thigh highs or or stockings, right? Will she wear, short socks? Some will, some won't, right? But again, the foot should be covered. Definitely the foot should be covered. Yeah, men and women, right? It doesn't matter. But again, if you're gonna, that's in general. Prayer, all the more so. All the more so, a person should come to synagogue in sandals, right? They're gonna, a person will say, but they're $300 sandals. They're like, high quality, very good. They're not shoes. They're not shoes by any stretch. So not shoes. How can you come in front of the King of Kings in sandals? It's a disgrace. Now, in that community, it's how they dress. A more modern, let's say, religious Zionist community. That's how they dress. But even by some people, I was like, really? That's how you come into synagogue? I mean, I became religious in this community, right? So, yeah. I mean, it's been more than 30 years I've been part of the community, but okay. So every now and then I see people like this. Okay. So, they may be in many ways more religious than me. Okay. You can't go by dress, very good, but it says something. It says something. If you come to synagogue during the week, you dress more casually. I get it. We don't. We dress the same. But, you want to be more casual. It's one thing. You still wouldn't wear sandals. But on Shabbos, you're not going to wear a white shirt. That's what most people wear. Right? For whatever reason, doesn't matter. But, you're not going to wear something like nice, like super nice. It's mind-boggling. I saw people in shorts there. I'm not even saying nice shorts. They say, well, you want to judge them favorably. Isn't it better they're in synagogue than not? Okay. That's what I was thinking also. Okay, at least they're here. They can be doing worse things, a lot worse things. They can be desecrating Shabbos. They can be doing, they cannot keep Shabbos. So pick your poison. Right? But at the same time, you come into synagogue. You come into synagogue, I would think, especially on Shabbos, you come like you just came from the beach. In some ways, I'll tell you a little bit better than that. But, isn't Shabbos holy day, holiest day of the week? I would think people would dress a little bit different, but, it just goes to show that if you have 2 feet in the secular world, a quarter of a foot in the religious world, so you do what other people do. You dress the way they dress. That's why we have specific dress. Someone asks, what about short sleeves? Yeah, so women is a problem. Women have to cover at least their elbow. So now if you can see me, I got short sleeves. Now some people would say, you don't wear short sleeves. Right? I've been teased by a few people. I don't have all short sleeve shirts, but definitely have some. So, will there be people who for a guy will never wear short sleeves? Yes. People want to think, wow, I'm more modern because I have short sleeves. I don't think so. Some people might, but it's more acceptable. Definitely more acceptable to wear short sleeves. So, for guys, less of an issue. For a woman, it's a bigger issue because her arm has to be covered. At least to her elbow. Has to be covered. Someone asked the book, Miftach Shlomo. Yeah, what about it? Book of the Keys of Shlomo, Jewish book. I doubt it. I don't think so. I mean, it doesn't sound like it. What does it mean? Those who trust in Hashem, kindness will encompass that. Yeah. Yeah, those trust in Hashem. They believe in God. Yeah, what does that mean? It means that God's the one in charge. That even in the bigger picture, when things look difficult, God's the one in charge. Right? In other words, if a person lays themselves down, it's called the bittul hayesh. They lay themselves down. They're totally nullified to God. Meaning, they put their best foot forward. Everyone's got an obligation to put their best foot forward. But at the same time, they know everything comes from God. So if everything comes from God and they have perfect faith, then kindness will encompass them. Now, does that mean that life is easy? No. No, but when a person lives their life, I just read so many stories recently, that a person realizes everything's in the hands of God. Everything's in the hands of God. God takes care of their needs. Now, sometimes you say it's better, sometimes it's worse, whatever. At the end of the day, belief in God is, that He runs the world and, He's in charge. It's called nullification. You totally nullify yourself to God. Now, it's not an easy thing to do, right? Not an easy thing to do. But when you realize, when you're in dire straits, it's a lot easier to do. So, there's a segula, there's a good omen that on Passover to Seder, right? There are verses that, you go through one of these verses, probably people go through very quickly, and what and what the verses mean and what they represent and all kinds of things. There's a verse there. It says the Jewish people screamed out to God, called out to God, right? Literally screamed out to God. So there's a segula during the first night or first 2 nights of Passover that when you get to that part of the Haggadah, literally you scream it out. Literally you say there's no other God but you, and you ask for anything you want, right? Because it says you scream out to God. Yeah. So so a Biederman should be tells a number of stories. People that didn't have children, and that's what that's the advice they were given, and then, a year later they have children, or a livelihood or whatever it was. Told a number of stories that at that point you scream out, and why did they get answered? Why did they get answered? Because they lay themselves down. And it's a bitul hayesh. It means they nullify themselves 100% to God. In other words, it's saying, God, you're the one in charge for everything. Not going to rely on this, not going to rely on that. You are the one in charge, period. And they scream out with all the depth of the heart, and they got answered. Right? So, kindness is going to come to them. But it has to be pure. It has to be 100%. Right? It can't be interwoven with other things. So a person has to realize, where the salvation comes from. Now, again, do we put our best foot forward? Yes. Do we put our best foot forward 100%? We might get answered, might not get answered. Doesn't matter. Salvation, as we always say, never comes from where you think it's going to come. Never. Never. Right? So now, comes on the Chofetz Chaim, a blessed memory. The Chofetz Chaim says, nothing bad ever comes out of heaven. So you got to say, what about difficulty? What about this? So we perceive it as bad. So there are many things we perceive as bad that ends up being good. And there are many things we perceive as being good, and guess what? It turns out bad. Right? So it's very hard, whatever we're going through to see. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Sometimes maybe it is bad, maybe it is good. Whatever it may be. But what's the bottom line? What's the bottom line of all this? The bottom line is, I'm going to put my best foot forward, which is not a guarantee for success, but I have to realize and say, probably 100 times a day, 1,000 times a day, no matter what happens, God, you are the one in charge. You are the one in charge. Now, we have to make effort, we have to change, and we have to be better, right? But at the end of the day, if we put all the onus on God, we put everything on Him, and He's the one in charge, and He's the one that can take care of everything. I don't have anything to worry about. Now, again, there are different levels here, obviously. Person has, 5 bills in 2 days to pay. They have no idea where the money's coming from, right? Again, you say, well, God, you're in charge. Good luck. Well, you're going to put your best foot forward. That's true. Sometimes, sometimes better, sometimes not. Okay. But at the end of the day, what the person say, okay, you're in charge. There's so many stories. People have been dug out of things, and, things change literally overnight. Who knows what the reason is, but I think one of the main reason is, I said, God, you're the one in charge. I'm doing my best. I'm trying this and that. You're going to take care of business. You're the one in charge. You'll make the connections. Whatever it is, right? That's not foolhardy, being foolhardy over here. Putting your best foot forward, that's true. But even putting your best foot forward, yeah, where's the ultimate salvation come from? It doesn't come from what I did. We have an obligation to put your best foot forward. Very good. Is that where salvation is going to come from? Usually 100% of the time, no. No. Right? Story, when during World War II, when Mary's yeshiva was, dire straits. So he was sent out trying to raise money, and he didn't come back with anything. Not only that, they used the yeshiva's money to travel certain places, whatever, and like he didn't make any money. He lost money. So then the yeshiva the next day, Rabbi Schneider wants to speak to him. And he said, I want to give you, I want to thank you very much. He goes, what are you talking about? He said that we just got a huge donation. It's going to tide us over for the next few months. He's like, but so Rabbi said, I don't understand. I went out, I spent the yeshiva's money, and I didn't make any money. Not only didn't I make any money, I lost money. So Moshe Schneider said, oh, he said, you're a heretic? He goes, heretics, God forbid. He's like, what do you mean? He said, you think I was, relying on you to save the yeshiva? You got to put in your shtadlus. You got to put your best foot forward. But your best foot forward is not a guarantee you're going to be successful. It just opens the door for other things to happen. It could happen. In other words, you put your best foot forward, it could work. May not work. Right? Totally may not work. Okay. Yeah. Not a guarantee. Totally not a guarantee. But at the end of the day, it opens up doors. It could, it opens up doors. So where you think the salvation is going to come from, you think it's going to come from here, come from there, come from somewhere else. Guess what? It probably comes from a place you never thought. Right? That is usually the case. I'm in the middle of something now. We're going to see what's going to be. Something could have come out of left field. We'll see. We'll see how, we'll see what happens. See how it ends up. But, it wasn't the way, definitely wasn't the way I planned. Not at all. So, it might go one way, might go another way. We'll see. But again, where you think, this is the bottom line, where you think that, a salvation or a particular salvation is going to come from, it's probably going to come in a place and like, you totally never thought of, which is like 99%, 100% of the time, and, if you would have like, if you're in a certain situation, so you say, okay, these are the top 10 things that could happen, take me out of the situation. Now, when something takes you out of the situation, that was probably number 10,250. Like you wouldn't have imagined, on your best day, on your worst day, this is the way it's going to go. Like you never would have thought in a million years. And guess what? God says, I can do anything. I'm going to make something come through the back door you never in a million years would have thought of. And say, okay, thank you very much. Right? And you wink to heaven and say, okay, you want to do it this way? You can do it this way. You can do it that way. But you never would have thought about it. Somebody asks, one second. Are we supposed to only try to wear linen? No. You can wear cotton, doesn't mean linen. The only thing the Torah speaks about linen is that you're not allowed to mix it with wool. Right? But you can wear cotton. I mean, cotton's better, right? It's not as heavy. Certainly. But there's no mitzvah just to wear linen. Certainly not. The only time it mentions, I think, in the Torah, right, at least one place for sure, is that you're not allowed to mix it with with wool. Right? It's Torah prohibition mixing wool and linen together. That's what we call shotness. Layers of linen. Okay. Linen hosiery. Yeah. I mean, listen, some things, are heavier, than others. Some, they have different, textures. Some are, much heavier. So that's, I would say, better to wear in the winter than, there are lighter ones certainly to wear, in the summer. But again, that's, it doesn't have to be linen though. I mean, it could be, it could be anything as long as, it's comfortable, whatever. It does the job. If one's goal is to dress elegantly, might that be proper? I don't know about that. I mean, elegant. If you're talking about being modest, you can be modest without being elegant. Being elegant is like, certainly for a woman, it's like you're dressing up, you're going to a wedding, right? Or something like that. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to dress like a slob either. There are people that, feel like, dressing really, so they put on like a robe, right? So like a robe is like wearing pajamas, right? I would say. But there are people, that will go shopping and do other things in a robe. I mean, it might be a nice robe, whatever. That's certainly not dressing up. Certainly not. But again, I think a woman should be dressed properly. Doesn't mean, every day it's gonna be like absolutely elegant, but it doesn't have to be that way. We think of elegant, I think like, person's going to an affair, they're going to, bar mitzvah, wedding, something, they really dress up, or for Shabbos. So in the week we don't dress up as much, but you know, doesn't mean you shouldn't look good, right? For a guy, it's easy. You wear a suit, you wear a hat and jacket. So again, it just depends on the color. Black with or without pinstripes, dark blue, dark gray with or without pinstripes, and like you're pretty safe, right? For women, okay, different things, but obviously can't be too loud, can't be red, right? Not, certainly dark red, totally red shirts and all that, and all that. But I would say that that's the case. Somebody asks, um, one second. Um, Somebody asks like this, has always been wear no sandals on Shabbos. What about time of Moses in the desert? Okay, maybe there were sandals. But again, you're talking about different, time period. So, even if they wore sandals in the desert, right? People make the same claim, similar claim. I mean, not exactly. Women don't want to wear nose rings. They say Rivka wore a nose ring, right? Rebecca wore a nose ring. Very good. So what? I would say if you're on her level, you can also wear a nose ring. In the Orthodox community, Orthodox community, there are some women that get their nose pierced. Yeah, but again, it's certainly not the vast majority. And most of these people that are going to get their nose pierced have issues with modesty, right? So again, if we're holding by their level, yeah, we can do a lot of different things, but we don't. Even if they did today, it's looked at very differently. Even if they did it then. Someone asked, I need whatever that saying is, a prayer. Regular daily prayer. I would say, so I think I mentioned podcast yesterday that if a person needs a salvation, right? Tehillim is always good. Saying Psalms is always good, but if you pray the afternoon service, and that's when a person needs the most, some of the most, what's it called, Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, right? Because it's in the middle of the day, right? Certainly in the winter, it's harder because sundown is earlier. In summer, it's a lot easier because sundown in most places is very late. So there is a good omen that if someone prays the afternoon service, they get answered immediately. Right? A lot of different reasons. I spoke about it before. I don't really want to go into it, but that's one good thing. Another good thing is is there is what to be said for saying, certain Psalms for 40 days. Wherever it brings down, if you say a complete book of Psalms every day for 40 days, you have intention for one specific thing, one salvation that you need, but you got to do it for 40 days. So the easiest book is the fourth book. Fourth book is from the book of Psalms, chapter 90 to 106. 16 Psalms that you say, and you have in mind every day. Every day you say it, you do it for 40 days. Every day you say it, you have in mind for one thing, whether it's for health, whether it's for livelihood. You don't mix. It's got to be one thing, and then you give a token amount to charity. Doesn't have to be a lot. right? It can be very little. You give a token amount to charity, you have that in mind, 40 days. 40 days is significant, right? So that would be good. Afternoon service is Psalm 145, Ashrei, Shmona Esrei, right? And Aleinu, right? Also you say Tachanun also, penitential prayers, Tachanun, but yeah, that's it's a shorter service. It should be the shorter service. The evening service is longer, right? A little bit longer, but this is probably the shorter service. And I brought down there in that podcast that it's a very good omen to get prayers answered immediately, like absolutely immediately. And a lot of the reasons you have to listen to the podcast over there. Complete till 90 to 106 every 40 days. Just keep saying it. Just yeah. Yeah. You say it for 40 days, you say it forever, it doesn't matter. But yeah, 40 days, and you have one thing in mind. Whatever salvation you need, one thing. One thing and give a small amount to charity. Right. That you got right. Yes. Yeah. Any other questions? Retail for 30 days. Yeah. It's funny. There's once an advert on a bus on a on one of the main buses here, and I guess it was probably during the month of Elul, before Rosh Hashanah, and there was a big advert on the bus. The Hillam's good, saying Psalms is good for the soul. So I remember I was like, but this is like a secular bus company. It's got a major monopoly on buses, but the bus system here. But in general, I'm like, wow, if they're telling you Tehillim is good to say, like, and they're secular, so okay, it's an advert, very good. Yeah, Tehillim never goes to waste. Tehillim, you can say more, you can say less. It's very powerful, right? Very, very powerful. What psalm and verses again? Psalm. Here, let me put it up here. Psalm 90 to 106 for 40 days. Even on Shabbos. You don't give money to charity on Shabbos, obviously, but you can even say it. You can even say it on Shabbos. So you do it for 40 days. Now I had somebody tell me, well, I've done this for 40 days, I did something else for 40 days, nothing happened. Nothing changed. Right? So you know what my answer was? Do it again. There could be other things blocking it, like okay, but even so, you keep doing it. Psalms never go to waste. They absolutely never go to waste, right? So, you can't give up, right? 100%, you can't give up. You should just keep doing it. But yeah, again, you have in mind for one thing that you need specifically. You have that in mind. Put a little bit of money aside for charity, right? And you do it for 40 consecutive days. Now, sometimes, what happens if you miss a day? You got to 35, you missed a day. Okay, you got to start again. It can happen. I had something, I say it every day. I had something where, I don't know, whatever, and, it just got messed up. Okay, so, you start from scratch. Or I had things where, like, right before sundown, I got it in, or did some of it and then did some of it afterwards, and, whatever. But again, you never, it's a good thing. I think, and many people have had their salvation, So, and Psalms in general never go to waste. Definitely never go to waste. So, it's always good. Yeah, let me see any other questions. Someone says, wait, giving charity each day. Yeah. Yeah, you give charity each day. But again, it doesn't have to be a lot. Absolutely doesn't have to be a lot. You give a quarter. You give a dime. I mean, it doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you should you should set it aside or give it every day. Right? Put it aside and then eventually give it, wherever you're going to give it. Right? Again, it doesn't matter how much. Right? It can be a minimal amount. That doesn't matter. Uh, but again, when you give it, I should have mentioned this. whatever you're going to set aside, you're going to say this money is for this specific thing that you're asking for, right? Again, if it's, let's say it's for health, you say this money is this money to charities for the sake of health, or it's for the sake of livelihood, or whatever. But yeah, you have to verbalize it. You should definitely verbalize it. If you didn't verbalize it, okay, you had it in mind, but you should verbalize it. Someone says they were giving us a good, yeah. Listen, if you have some, is there a set amount to give to charity? 10%. You should give 10%. Right? If you want to give more, you can give up to 20%. Shouldn't give more than 20%. Definitely shouldn't give more than 20%, then you might need help from other people. But you should give at least 10%. 10% of the money you make. If you get money, let's say someone helps you, you get money as gifts. That you don't have to declare. That you don't have to give charity. Right? If you want to, you can. You don't have to. Right? Gifts, you don't have to. Right? But income, 10% you should give. And what happens if you have no money and you can't give? So you can't give. You should keep in mind how much you have to give. And then, if you do get money, then, you give it back. But if you don't have to put yourself in debt to do it. Yeah, any other questions? 10% of the gross, yeah. Someone says get charity organization, help the homeless, hungry, okay. A lot of good things to give to. When, unfortunately, Jewish people, the tortoise roof has asked Rabbi Kiva, if your God is so great, why are there people in need? Right? Why do there people that God doesn't help? Right? What was Rabbi Kiva's answer? To give people of means a portion of the world to come. Because they didn't have people to help, they would never give charity. Right? They would never give charity in general. So yeah, there are plenty of causes, plenty of very good causes. No, no shortage. Definitely no shortage. Yeah. Any other questions? Someone says you're right. It's all a test, right? That's what life is, 100%. All right, I'm gonna stop here. This every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions? Find me on Facebook at Mark Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com. Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos and Q&As, ethics of our fathers. Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com. RBBICHIAIMCOFFMAN@gmail.com. Wish everyone a good beginning of the day, middle